Hi, this is George Mueller, and this is part 3 of an introduction to Roman history intended for my History 101 students. In part 2, we left off at a moment when the brothers Gracchi had left Rome bitterly divided between the Optimates, the wealthy, and the Populares, the poor. And it's crucial that Rome's divided at this moment because it comes under intense pressure. In the north, a tribe known as the Cimbri have invaded the area of Gaul, up here, and destroyed the Roman army sent to fight them. In the south, Rome faces a serious problem with its ally Numidia. What happened in Numidia was that the Numidian king had died, and he left a recognized son and an illegitimate son who he had recognized. Technically, the illegitimate son, although he was older, he was an accomplished military man, he couldn't become king. But the Numidians preferred him, and he killed one of his brothers and drove the others into exile. Now, those brothers quickly ran to Rome and requested assistance because they were clients of Rome. So, Jugurtha was called before the Roman Senate, and he showed up in the city with a vast amount of money and simply bribed enough senators to be found not guilty. This whole episode, because it was so blatant, really damaged the reputation of the Roman Senate. On his way out of the city, according to the historian Sallust, Jugurtha said, "Yonder is a city put up for sale, and woe befall her should she find a buyer," which is one of the greatest quotes in history. Now, eventually, it becomes so famous that Jugurtha simply bribed his way out of this problem that Rome reverses its position and goes to war with its ally. The problem is, Numidia is a warlike nation. Their capital is in a desert and is inaccessible. And, quite frankly, the Roman legions that are sent to conquer Numidia are destroyed. So Rome's in a bad spot. They're losing whole armies. And it seems like the Optimates can't find a military leader who can get things done. So they turn to one of the Populares, a man named Marius. And Marius comes in and he changes the Roman military. He makes it much lighter and faster moving. Soldiers have to carry food, several days' supplies of food, all the time in case they're ambushed. And he changes some of their equipment and makes them much more effective. He heads north and takes care of the Cimbri. To the south, he sends his lieutenant Sola, who's an Optimate, the other political party. He sends him into Numidia, and there Sola conquers Jugurtha and takes the capital of Numidia after a climactic campaign. If you like military history, Sallust is great. His book about Jugurtha is fantastic. But this ends the disaster that was looming for Rome, but it leads to another catastrophe, and that's the social war of 90 BCE. During this war, it's not external forces that attack Rome, it's Rome's allies within Italy. Some of the allies, some other Italians, had been given Roman citizenship. Some hadn't. And this gave some Italians tax advantages and political and social advantages over others. The ones who hadn't been given these advantages rose up in rebellion. And this is a very destructive war. It's fought viciously, which is ironic because the people fighting this war have no intention of destroying Rome. And in the end, it's ironic because Rome, led by Sola, wins the war. But they have to give the people they were fighting essentially what they asked for. This makes Sola a celebrity. And when another military disaster looms on the horizon, this time the invasion of the province of Asia, the old kingdom of Pergamum, when that happens and 180,000 to 50,000 Romans are killed, Sulla was given command of an army and told to go take care of this problem. But his old commander, Marius, was jealous, and he pressured the Roman government into recalling Sulla's army and giving him command. But he didn't reckon on Sulla. Sulla marched with his army back into the city, drove Marius into exile, and then set off for Asia with his army. Unfortunately, Marius immediately returns and then again calls for Sulla to give up his army. Of course, Sulla doesn't, and he cements the loyalty of his men by fighting a war in Asia for several years with absolutely no support from Rome. In fact, a constant stream of threats and commands to stop. In the end, what this does is give Sulla a huge advantage. He has battle-hardened troops who are personally loyal to him. And rather than being hurt by the lack of support from Rome, he actually seems to have been strengthened by it. And when he returns to Rome, he easily, with his battle-hardened troops, brushes aside the armies who are sent to stop him, who outnumber him significantly. By some accounts, by as much as 2-1. He brushes them aside, takes the city, and then things get really nasty. Sulla declared himself dictator, an old procedure that no one had done for several hundred years. Once he's dictator, he's above the law, very much like a Greek tyrant. He then took steps to change the Roman government, and he issued a list of his enemies to be executed. What's important about Sulla aren't the changes that he made to the Roman government. They actually don't last very long. But he serves as a model for Julius Caesar. And Caesar is going to be the person who really defines the end of the Roman Republic. Caesar was a populare and had only just avoided being executed by Sulla because family members had supported Sulla. So Caesar is a man who's known for his ambition. And the problem is he's in the wrong political party. The Optimates are in ascendancy. The Populares, while they have a lot of public support and they hold some lower positions, the Populares are basically shut out of the higher offices, especially consulships. And that's what Julius Caesar wants. Caesar formed an alliance with 2 other men who were likewise shut out of politics, in an alliance that cut across party lines. The other members of his party were Crassus, who is, well, the richest man in the Roman world. Crassus made his first $9 billion during the Social War, and some estimates put his wealth at as much as $180 billion in gold. And I should mention, this is not adjusted for inflation, $180 billion. This is the gold that he either personally owned or was owed. If you translated it into modern dollars, it'd be $180 billion. The wealthiest man today is worth $67 billion. So Crassus was so rich, he would still be the richest man in the world. Just think about that for a moment. Well, whatever the case, he's barred from many political offices because he made a lot of his money loaning money to other politicians. And while they can't openly insult him, they don't support him. So he's an Optimate, but he's on the make. Now, he has had one military success to his name, and that is when the gladiator Spartacus revolted and no other Roman could stop him. He was the person who was able to put an end to the revolt. Now, these 2 younger politicians had allied with a third man, Pompey, who had named himself Pompey the Great. And Pompey was just as easy to work with as his self-given name suggests. Pompey is older and he's hungry for the kind of honors that only the Senate can bestow. That'll be important. Now, together, these men are able to get Julius Caesar a position as consul. And as consul, Caesar immediately makes his name by issuing a law, much like the one the Gracchi had suggested, that redistributes land to the poor. Now, in effect, this law is mostly symbolic. It doesn't really do that much to help the poor, but it does cement Caesar's popularity with the poor. After his year in office, Caesar is given a governorship of the province of Gaul and Spain. So he's sent to the very edge of the Roman Empire. And this is exactly where he wants to be. There are threats to Rome there, so there's opportunities for military service. And that's exactly what he does. Caesar sets out eliminating any threat or potential threat or anything that looks like it could become a threat or things that look like they have things that Caesar would like to have from the borders of Rome. And what this really means is Caesar goes into pretty much an unlimited war mode, attacking Rome's neighbors, not randomly, but without much consideration for the niceties of politics. Now, this is thoroughly illegal. He is recommended to stop, then ordered to stop, and doesn't. And he sends back money and riches and slaves back to Rome, making him popular with the public, but unpopular with the government. And in 50 BCE, he's ordered to give up his army and return to Rome as a private citizen, essentially for trial. Instead, he marched with his troops across the river Rubicon, which is the ceremonial border of Rome, and invades the city. Pompey was waiting for him with an army, but Caesar was a military genius, although Pompey was too. But Caesar's army was battle-hardened, and Pompey's, frankly, had been on ceremonial duty around Rome, or were fresh recruits. They didn't stand a chance. Once back in Rome, he was made dictator in 47, then dictator for life in 44, and he changed the way the Roman government worked. He gave his supporters land outside of Italy and extended citizenship to foreign allies if they had helped him. But he began to look more and more like he was going to make himself a king. And eventually, in 44 BC, he was assassinated by his one-time supporters. After Caesar's assassination, Rome passes into an era of uncertainty. The public is angry over the death of their champion, Julius Caesar. On the other hand, there's no other political force his equal. And what winds up happening is Caesar's adopted son, his nephew Octavian, who he barely met before his death, and his one-time lieutenant Mark Antony rose to the fore as the people who waged a civil war and killed Caesar's assassins. Once that civil war was won, they pass on into an era where these two men are the most prominent politicians in Rome. Octavian is young and unproven, but he's clever. Mark Antony is well known, but he's intemperate. He has a reputation for drunkenness, and, well, that reputation is going to come back to bite him. They eventually divide up the empire between the two of them. As part of his spoils, Mark Antony takes possession of Egypt and travels there to meet with Egypt's ruler, Cleopatra, who's technically the pharaoh of Egypt. Now, Cleopatra had a long affair with Julius Caesar and probably had a son with him. But that son has no standing in Roman society. Antony's wife at the time, he had 4 over the years, his wife at the time was Fulvia, and he had actually left her back in Rome overseeing politics on his behalf. Fulvia was a forceful woman, and eventually she raised her own armies and fought a war with Octavian in 41 BC. Now, Octavian did win the war, and Fulvia went back to see her husband, who actually had no idea the war was even going on until after it had practically been lost. She died of natural causes, allowing Octavian and Mark Antony to renew their alliance. And they renewed it in the person of Octavian's sister, Octavia, who married Mark Antony. This is going to turn out to be the worst thing Mark Antony could have done, because when Mark Antony and Octavian again fall out and fight a civil war, Mark Antony abandons his new wife Octavia, who's pregnant at the time, in favor of Cleopatra. Their romance will be heralded through history. But Octavia is the one who's more popular in Rome. She's the perfect Roman woman, pretty, but not too pretty, very proper, well-spoken, and she rallies the women of Rome and their husbands onto her brother's side against her erstwhile husband. Eventually, the two will fight a war that sees its climax at the Battle of Actium, where Antony is commanding the ground forces, and Cleopatra is commanding her navy. When the ground forces are cut off and surrounded, and Cleopatra abandons her lover, he commits suicide, bringing the romance of Mark Antony and Cleopatra to a sad end. Cleopatra herself will come to her end shortly thereafter, because Octavian will invade Egypt and, take the queen prisoner. History doesn't tell us exactly what happened, but we do know that Cleopatra was alive, and then Mark Antony went to see her in her chambers, and found her, supposedly she'd been bitten by an asp. Now, in modern day, that sounds like a very strange way for a queen to die, and a really random one. But it's full of symbolism for the people of the time. The kingship in Egypt was symbolized by the snake, which the Romans found very menacing. And Cleopatra was reputed to have magical powers. Remember, this is a superstitious era, and this kind of thing was taken very, very seriously. So the idea that she was killed by the symbol of her own power is both poetic justice and could be seen as the gods repudiating her actions. Now, as far as whether or not she actually was bitten by a snake or caused a snake to bite her, thereby committing suicide, no one can tell. And likewise, no one knows exactly what happened to her son, Caesarion, who would have been, by any other culture's laws, Octavian's half-brother by adoption. Well, whatever the case, there's a little detail that I found very interesting that was in one of the sources. And that's that one of the pieces of plunder that Octavian stole from Cleopatra's chambers was a rolled-up rug. But when they were out in the middle of the Mediterranean, Octavian ordered the rug thrown over the side of his ship. And the reason that's interesting is, when Octavian went into those chambers, Caesarion was supposed to be with his mother, and he was never seen coming out. And Cleopatra had, according to legend, had herself delivered to Julius Caesar, rolled up in a rug. So the connection that could be drawn was the result of that meeting, the son, Caesarion, then killed, rolled up in a rug, and disposed of that way, in a sort of horrible irony? We'll never know, because Octavian never told anyone. This leaves the Roman world looking like this. A huge sprawling empire of a variety of people controlled by one small city in Italy. And it's a city that's not sure how its government is going to operate. But it now lay at the feet of Octavian, a young man who's been unproven. Will he be up to the task of ending the civil wars that are tearing Roman society apart? As usual, this is George. This is the end of the introduction to Roman history at long last. In the class comments, I'm going to ask you to let me know if you like this longer form of intro, or if I should keep it to the shorter form I used for chapters 1 and 2, and 3 and 4. So I'll put that up as a discussion board. If you have any questions, let me know. And like, subscribe. Wait, I'm not a YouTuber. Don't like and subscribe. If you have questions, contact me through a class.